So tuning is something that you have to consistently look at, right? You have to evolve the state of the system. You start out with a system that's doing 1 million messages a month, it's got one configuration, and then all of a sudden, if it's doing 10 million a month, you need to do other things to it. Well, we ran into some collisions pretty quickly in one of the platforms where, the Postgres instance was only so configurable, right? The Postgres instance also wouldn't let us get access to very specific configuration settings that we know and have found have a significant benefit in a Mirth Connect install. So we were effectively handcuffed. And this was the offering was an out of the box, Postgres build. It wasn't their own Postgres build inside of a VM, as an example.
Right.
And so, which in the beginning sounded wonderful. Manage Postgres, it's all good. Let's fire it up. But then when they got to doing 16, 20 million messages a month, it was a problem. Um, so memory limitations, limited access to configure, components of the cloud solution was very telling for us, right? And at that time, we didn't have our own hosted solution. We were doing some hybrid stuff in places, and it was very enlightening for us as we started to engineer solution on what we would and wouldn't do. Just those learning experiences about those functional limitations.
So what you're saying there, if I may, is that if you have properly scoped out the capacity that you need and it fits, it's a great thing. Let it go. But you got to do that planning first.
You do. I've been working on some property here, and do you need a 3-yard dumpster, a 20-yard dumpster, or a 30-yard dumpster, right? Well, in the beginning, you may not need a 30, or you may need a 30 now, and you only need to go to a 3-yard later. It's the same problem statement, right? And if you can't crystal ball that, you got to make sure you've got the ability to evolve it, right?
Right.
And a lot of folks don't realize that you can't get the 30-yard dumpster. It's
Yeah.
not available at some point, right? You're kind of stuck. So
And the dumpster analogy has nothing to do with the cloud hosting, by the way.
no. It has to do with me moving trees in mass, tree stumps in mass off the property. Sorry.
Yeah.
But and then the next thing that becomes really crystal to folks quickly is the cost.
Yeah.
The cloud costs can be deceiving because they tend to be priced based upon the movement of data into or out of that cloud instance. And, moving around a bunch of 1,000-character HL7 messages is one thing. You start moving around CCDAs or FHIR bundles or images, your whole paradigm could just blow up. And I know early on in the Zen ecosystem, we evaluated this pretty seriously. And I don't know, Derek, maybe you can speak to some of the numbers that you were seeing relative to evaluating some of those cloud solutions for cost. I recall that you and Jim both were vibrating at a high frequency over even the idea.
Yeah, and especially with the nature of the healthcare network that exists, you don't really know how many transactions are going to come hit you on Monday. So really understanding that that cost associated to that is hard to predict. And then all of a sudden you'll wake up and you're like, oh wow, my AWS bill is way more than it was last week, and you got to now pay that. So we really wanted to avoid that with our solution and be able to predict more on a overall capacity, not have to deal with those types of cost predictions because they're hard to make. They're really hard to make.
And you know what, guys, just so from a general standpoint, in the previous episodes, we talked about the difficulty that it is to estimate. You're being challenged with establishing connectivity to that, that other Dixie cup, okay, and on that other end, and you obviously have a use case in it, but can you actually predict what kind of message, what kind of traffic is going to be coming across it? If it's a point to point, you got a pretty good idea of what's going on with it. If it's a national network, two vastly different use cases, and you got to be able to predict that.
Yeah. And then, to the predictability is it gets to the monitoring, right?
Mhm.
Do you have effective monitoring tools in the cloud solution that can give you alarms, visibility, and trends of the traffic volume and those types of things? And are you leveraging them, right? I mean, most of these cloud solutions, their benefit is it's an a la carte menu of things that you can go pick and pack and build up your solution. And are you picking the tools that you really are going to need to cover your implementation and your visibility of it? And that can be a daunting task unless you're an SME in that cloud solution, right? What do I need? And what do I effectively need to do? Now, you may have that in your environment. Most folks that we talk to that are to start this kind of a homegrown DIY solution, they're not SMEs in those spaces. And so, it starts to question, you can stand up an AWS E3 instance with no firewall. And we've seen this. No security appliance. We've seen this in the wild. SSH is open, 8443 is open, 8080 is open, and whatever else you're not intentionally blocking, right? So it's dangerous. It's dangerous, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
And in one of our previous discussions, I think I entitled it the duh factor. If you're listening to this right now and you heard what Ron just said there with regard to those ports and other things, and you went, well, duh. Well, okay, then you know what's going on. But there are people that are trying to do this that aren't going, duh. They're going, oh, what number was that? Indicator.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, speaking further on that security aspect, we didn't even mention any type of compliance efforts. We're talking about just getting this solution deployed, working in an efficient manner. But is it compliant with high trust CSFR2 security controls? Or is it SOC 2? Like, are you doing that investigation as you're selecting these items and making sure that I will be compliant and making sure that security is integrated from the beginning? Takes a lot of effort to do that.
It's a
and
great.
SME experience again, to my point, right? If you've got Johnny who says he can do it and he's doing it, but he doesn't have he's not a CISSP. He doesn't have the support of that. He doesn't even that's not even on his radar. Oh yeah, I can stand that up. We'll just open up SSH and we can get in and do what we need to. And that's a
Right.
dangerous position to put your company in.
And because we are doing Dixie cup and string, you may be able to do that internally on your end, but who you're connecting to, they may cut the deal and okay, we're going to connect to this, and the next thing you know, you get a security questionnaire that is how many pages, Derek? And
I've seen him go up to like 400 questions.
seriously,
They get gnarly.
it's a massive thing to do because you're dealing with somebody else. You got to comply with somebody else's needs at that point. So you have to think about those things ahead of time. If you've got it and you're just dealing internally and you're standing it up, again, DIY is a great solution. Go for it. Do it. But here's a checklist. That's what we're talking about. That checklist of things that you should, for everything that we're talking about, you should be going, well, duh. And if so, then you're okay. If you're not, it's an indicator.
And again, the last item on this cloud that I think is important to understand is you're putting all of your eggs into one vendor's basket, right? You are either going to be an Azure shop or a Google shop or an AWS shop, and you need to really become the experts in those solutions, and you're buying what they're offering, and
Right.
you don't have a whole lot of choices there. And they really don't play well with each other in a general sense from a low level infrastructure perspective, to leverage more than one, right? It may you know they're their own technology set.
Right.
So, you know, our approach was we were going to take ownership of our cloud, which is a private cloud, but is hybrid.
Right.
You know, if we need to blow up the balloon, we can do that in an AWS behind our cloud and alongside our cloud, or we can use other private cloud solutions that more mirror our core infrastructure, right, Derek? I mean, we've got partners that we can call today and say, I need X compute power and storage, and we can align and blow up the balloon, you know?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean that was the whole point of our decision making, was to start from the ground up of hybrid cloud in mind, so that we're not building out a solution in Azure and AWS and go, okay, what if we do want to support hybrid cloud? Now you got to recreate all of what's in AWS over in Azure. So we implemented a lot of those foundational pieces so that we can just stand them up anywhere,
yeah, blow it up.
regardless of cloud vendor type.
Yeah. And that, you know, again, we're in a different scenario than most that are listening to this. You know, we're in the business of doing it. It is our core business. So our use case is slightly different, potentially, but it may not be different depending on your individual use case there. So we're really running a gamut here, from little do it yourself, though these things that you need to be careful of, to you know, the industrial strength, which is where we are, obviously, in terms of security and performance and those kind of things, because we have to be. That's what we do. So finding where you are located on that continuum is an awfully important thing to do going into it, rather than finding it out and fixing it after the fact. It's a big deal. All right. Let's move on to the next topic that we had there. And Ron, I think you're the best one to touch on this going into it. And that is the number of different solutions that you're connecting to. Again, we're all talking Dixie cup and string, and how do we get secured information going back and forth to what that other Dixie cup is. And then when you stop breaking it down, you can have just point to point to a particular solution, and that's your use case. Great, fairly straightforward, fairly easy. But if you are, you know, a vendor and you're connecting to multiple systems, he tees it up for Ron. Run with it.
Yeah, you know, when I started in the healthcare IT business about 16, 17 years ago, there were 3,700 EMRs, EHRs in the marketplace. None of them were doing the same thing the same way at all. Meaningful use started to align that, you know. We saw quite a bit of attrition on meaningful use 1. Meaningful use 2 was more attrition. And since meaningful use 2, there's even been more. You know, consolidation and attrition, a lot of attrition, because of features and functions, especially in data sharing and data integrations.
Right.
Now we've got about 500, and there many of the you know, the top 50 are behemoths. You know, we're talking Epic, Cerner, ECW, Athena. You know, NextGen is in that top 50 number. They all have kind of their target taxonomy, whether it's a hospital system or government or, you know, small practitioners, specialties, all that. So each of them have been doing their own thing for so long. They have their own APIs, they have their own methods of connecting, they have their own things that they support. And a lot of the tech vendors that we talk to, they're fairly capable engineering teams and understand modern day you know, API practices. And so a lot of them start to evaluate, you know, native integrations with a particular EMR. And what I mean by native, not using a standardized data exchange like HL7, CCDAs, IHE, XCA. And so they go directly for the EMR's API. And they, you know, that first, the sales guys telling them, yeah, we got to connect to Athena and we got to do it now. And so they go build an Athena API integration. Then about 7 months later, the sales guy comes in and it's, okay, now we got to connect the ECW. Let's get the EC. Wait a minute. We just got done writing that 200-hour project to do that Athena thing. We're going to do another 200-hour project to connect with ECW? Hold on a minute. And this happens a lot of times. And not all of the EMRs support the same functionality, even with their own APIs. They expose certain things, they don't expose certain things, they allow you to do some things, but not others. So you got to really dig into what are you trying to accomplish and where is your target going to end up from an integration perspective. Well, we just need appointments. Okay, well, you can get appointments from an SIU feed. That's a fairly straightforward, simple integration, and you can get all the details, and you can do that bidirectionally as an example. So you could have a scheduling external system that's so much better than the scheduling system in an EMR, and that's why they're buying your product. And you can go to that simple connection with that SIU feed rather than talking to their API. Because what's the next feature you're adding to your product? And do they support that with the API? You know, and because we've had these things so long in the HL7 data exchange, both the V2 and V3, and XCA, XDS, and now FHIR's coming. So FHIR now has become the API magic sauce, right? We're just going to use the FHIR endpoints and it's all going to work. And when you look at the largest EMR vendor in the country and their FHIR implementation, while functional and could be very beneficial in many use cases, it only implements 57 of 161 FHIR resources. And of those 57, there's only 6 that are writable. And they're only writable for very specific things. So like observations, a lab result, you cannot write a CBC result to their FHIR endpoint. You can only write vitals and what they call LDA, lines, effectively updates to connections, lines, LDA was the acronym, but it's for monitoring equipment to update flow rates and other things for medications and stuff like that. And then they've got an oversight process on it, meaning a human being has to go evaluate an allergy or a problem and approve it from a holding tank. So you now have a workflow blockage that you can't really do much about versus HL7 results. Those are so trusted. If the source is connected, they go straight to the client chart. So you could end up with some problem that you're trying to put into the system that's a week stale, 2 weeks stale in a holding tank, right? Just the person that does the holding tank review's been on vacation, right? Which is not good. That's not good for patient care.
No. Now, I think we all want to make sure that we're being clear here. The work that the ONC is doing, the aspect of the national networks and TEFCA, using APIs. It's a great thing, and we're glad that they're doing it. Mickey Tripathi just put out a good article, Ron, that you shared with me yesterday, that I read, that is talking about data blocking. I don't think anything of what you just mentioned is intentional data blocking.
No.
It's just the facts of where we are today, and whoa, something's flying around, and things are moving to getting better, and that's great, and that helps us all. But it isn't there today, is what I think is what your point is, right?
It is. And sometimes it's going to have to be an all of the above approach is really the way I deal with our potential clients, right? There's no panacea to these answers. It's absolutely not a magic bullet. You may get better information out of a FHIR connection, and may get better workflow management from an HL7 connection, and you potentially want to do both.
Right.
to give your customer, the EMR user, the best experience from your own product, right? Which is really what this all boils down to, right? Is you're trying to market your product to a consumer of it, and what's the best answer for that thing to do exactly what you want it to do and grow, right?
Exactly. You've got different characteristics work better in different scenarios, and you need to be familiar with those. Now, you might be because your use case is limited to those specific kind of things. Taking it, bringing it back to the number of EMRs and the advent of the new technologies to interact with today. Well, again, which is a wonderful thing. We're thrilled that everybody is doing that. Is that you have to know those characteristics of each one of those potential Dixie cups that you're connecting to. And the volume of those, of course, grows exponentially with the more that you're going to do. So if you're point to point, the only thing that you're going to connect to is an Epic system, and you've got the internal, and you know that, okay, you can manage those things. But again, you have to look at your use cases. And if you got the next best thing since sliced bread, and you want to connect to anybody that's out there, you got a very different use case that's exponentially more difficult to not only build, but maintain as they continue to change in the years to come. And they will. It's a very fluid market that we're dealing with right now. So it's quite a challenge to be able to do that.
The other thing that most folks don't ever realize when they first start out in this discovery process is those APIs a lot of times are not free. Getting into their app store, these kinds of things, and many of them, and I'm not pointing to anyone in general. I didn't mention by name, but I was speaking of the largest EMR. This isn't just exclusive to them. They all play this game. Or it's their model of how they support this API functionality. So I mean, I'm not disparaging the concept, but you have to evaluate that to say, oh, they want a portion of my revenue stream for this, potentially, right?
And it is reasonable for them to charge, and they have the ability under the law to charge a reasonable fee. But depending on how many connections you're making determines whether it's reasonable for you individually.
Exactly. Versus an HL7 integration as an example,
Right.
Many of these EMR technology vendors sell HL7 integrations in buckets in blocks of 10. Well,
Right.
You did one and you now have 9 laying around. So you can go do 9 more without spending any more money other than a little bit of time and effort, human capital, not just, writing checks, to go do that integration. So you gotta weigh that side of the equation also with your data sharing partners, because, you know, either you're going to pay it to play in the playground, or they're going to pay it relative to getting the services from the EMR vendor to do the one-time connection.
It's a great point, and I can tell you, from my point of view, obviously, I'm watching costs and how we do those things and those type of connections. With you, again, this is a technical discussion. With you as doing the technical parts of it, don't hand wave a month-over-month cost or onboarding costs or other things, lest you get a very interesting conversation with the person that's in charge of the purse strings here in the future. You gotta look at those first.
You have to, I mean, the gray beard isn't gray because I don't do that, right? Gray beard got gray from doing that for so many years and going, I'm never going to sell that. There's no way I'm getting them to buy off on that, right? I got to find another way.
Exactly. It's just the realities of it. And if you don't know that those things are out there coming, you got to ask those questions first. And that's why, again, bringing it back to the whole point here, it is those DIY characteristics that you got to watch out for. And if you're saying, well, duh, well, okay, you've been there before, you probably got a gray beard, good for you. You're in good shape, but there are a lot of people that don't. Derek, any other thoughts from your side with regard to EMRs and EHRs? It's a little bit outside of what you're doing with Foundation, but it does go to connectivity issues. Are there characteristics there that is that we might want to we potentially didn't put on the list here?
We've covered this in the previous DIY episodes, mainly but I'll just remind everyone it's the VPN connections that are required. There's probably going to be a lot associated to that, and VPN connections are not great. People should be migrating away from that, in my opinion. So, but we have already covered that in the previous 2 episodes, so I don't want to.
That's good, but it's a great thing to remind people of. And we do have EMRs that have stopped and said, we're not doing any more of those. It's changing.
It doesn't change the ability to still do the integration. We're just doing mutual TLS and those types of things, which everyone's happier with, right? So
it's a good thing. All right, let's talk the DIY and the national networks here overall. We'll change topics a little bit. And when we say national networks today, we're really referring to eHex or eHealth Exchange, Commonwealth, and Care Quality. Those are the big 3 that are there. I'm not certain that there is another one, quite honestly, but because those are the ones that we certainly concentrate on. And the forthcoming TEFCA characteristics. eHex and Commonwealth, we've talked about that in previous sessions. Both of those are pursuing and have our TEFCA QHENs that will be there. Care Quality is a framework, not necessarily a network in and of itself there. But you do have the situation where you can be connected to eHex and not elect to be TEFCA at this point. So both Commonwealth and eHex have the ability for you to get connected and migrate to and have one foot in both camps, make a whole bunch of things with regard to that. But those are the networks that we're talking about when we do that. And the biggest thing and the first thing that we put on the list here to talk about, we've touched on it just a little bit earlier today, is the incoming query volume. Most people are thinking of, when they're talking about connectivity, well, how many requests am I going to be making and what kind of data am I going to get? The national networks changes that a little bit, Ron, with regard to incoming. Tell us what some of your experiences have been.
So what's interesting is the use case of the participant. This is really something that has been very enlightening to inbound volumes and traffic patterns in general. If you're a telemedicine practitioner and you're using, you're going to the national networks and your general treatment thing is colds and flu and, stub toes or whatever, right? And you're just doing a quick, you need to go to the ER for that cut. Please pack up and go to the ER. You're not probably going to have a lot of interest from the DoD on the Commonwealth network, right? If you're, a brick and mortar facility providing treatment for cancer, and you're within, let's say, 40 miles of a military base, you are probably going to be on the radar for the DoD. What does that mean? The DoD queries daily for the population of the DoD VA network every day from everybody that they have an interest in. So you're going to see 300 to 600,000 queries on the daily because they know you have interesting traffic for their cohort of patients.
And that's optional. You can just turn it off, right?
Well, you can ask them to turn it off, but they don't like that. So they will temporarily, as part of the Commonwealth through Care Quality, if you're having some performance issues or some scaling problems, they will temporarily suspend, but they ultimately want to get it going again, because the idea is, of course, reciprocal data sharing that has a meaningful impact to patients.
Exactly.
And that's really what we all want. Even as patients, we all want that. So then there's another pattern on incoming query volume that we kind of discovered recently, that particular implementer technology vendor in the care quality network implemented a new feature. I love this. The feature is called the fast lane. And the
Oh,
feature is a situation where they will attempt to run an XCPD transaction to an endpoint or endpoints. And if the transaction takes longer than 5 seconds, they will abandon the transaction. Now, in our world, I'm going to be passing that transaction through to your back office, and your back office is going to be doing work to respond to that transaction. And when you give me that response back from your patient lookup service, I got no place to give it to because they walked away from the transaction. And in our world, because we do so much monitoring of error codes and directional problems, both in and out, Derek ended up with this nightmare scenario of getting all of these, what were they, 502, Derek, or something, or 503s? What were the errors that were getting thrown for that?
Some sort of 500 response or
500, yeah,
499. I can't remember
So our
precisely.
alarms were going off and we're scratching our head. What is going on? And we start digging in and we find this abandoned connection problem. Well, the feature then says, oh, you can't respond in 5 seconds. So I'm going to give you more work to do. Here's the long queue or the slow lane. I'm going to query you again. They were querying one of our clients 13 million times. 13 million times inbound, and I can only assume should have been 6 million or 3 million transactions.
right.
And so
So,
here, our system is lighting up their patient lookup service, and then on the 6th second, they're getting the same query a second time.
so if you're in charge of doing the interoperability and putting the DIYing the Dixie cup and string to this, not only do you have a performance issue with regard to that feature that they came up with, which actually is a pretty good idea if there was a reasonable period of time in it, but your back end over here has to be able to respond and do that as well. And if you're passing that request through in a timely fashion via your interoperability, and we're assuming that you are, you've got things performance tuned for yourself, you're clobbering your back end. And so your developers back there are going, what are you doing to us here? What happened?
Right.
Just doubled the number of queries.
So, yeah, oops, right, oops. Another recent trend in this DIY, and Jim, we talked about this yesterday. I didn't put it in our notes here, but for some reason, folks are finding new products in the market that can kind of do what Mirth Connect does, but it's a much lower level solution, and you've got to roll the whole process, not just your environment, meaning you're actually building channel handlers, right? Routes of messaging. And we had a couple recently that the product, and I'm not going to rip the product. It's probably a great product for various things or people, but it's a function of where are you at in your capacity to do is really what my question is, right?
Right.
And so they're trying to do SAML signing with this solution. It does SAML signing, but they don't understand the SAML requirements in National Network Data Exchange. And the SAML requirements for National Network Data Exchange are the keys to the kingdom. You don't do it right, you're not getting anywhere, right?
Right.
And, we end up being inadvertent consultants. These aren't our clients. These are external people trying to connect with our clients. We become inadvertent consultants to them for free, effectively, or on our customers' dime, in trying to educate them on how to do these things. And, sharp knives and chainsaws should not be used by little kids, right? It's the simplest way I can put it. You got to be careful, right?
You
Because
know,
painful.
Ron, again, we didn't put that on the list per se, but it's a really good point for the DIYers. Okay, you have the knowledge to do this stuff. Great, good for you. You put checks in the boxes that we've been talking about. Fantastic, good for you. But because there is that Dixie cup and string characteristic, by definition, that means that there's somebody on the other side that has to be able to be at your caliber, your level as well. And what you will find doing it yourself is that you'll have some other experts out there that can flip switches and make things happen and everything's great. And then the next one, you're in a graduate level class and you know how to do it, and all of a sudden the junior high school student shows up.
Yeah.
You get to try to educate them enough to where that they can get this done, and that's the only other resource that Dixie cup on the other end has.
Yeah. We've had referrals from folks that are in the space because they had somebody trying to DIY National Network Data Exchange, and they were on it for 3, 6, 8 months. And finally, the folks that were involved were like, we're going to send some people over to you guys. We need you to help them, right? Which is good, but it's just evidence that the DIY teams, or you may have a competent engineer in one particular technology, does not mean that they're going to be able to grasp all of these other concepts, right? I've been writing code since '85. There's some things I'm really good at. There are other things I still can't wrap my head around, and I've got SMEs behind me on my team to do it. And they give it to me in a dumbed down enough manner that I can give it to Jim in a mechanism that makes sense for the business. And that's how it should work, right? So SAML is a big problem. There's a lot of folks out there doing data exchange this way. They don't even validate SAML. They don't even look at it. Okay. It is the security mechanism for the data exchange. Just because you've got a TLS, mutual TLS connection, doesn't mean the content is secured and from the expected source, or you got to evaluate that SAML to go, wait a minute, yeah, somehow you're getting in on my inbound MTLS, but you're not able to effectively sign this message with the agreed upon security context. Bye-bye. Or
Right.
somebody got their hands on an old message and they're reprocessing an old message that is legally signed but is effectively expired, and shoving that back into the chain, which, if you're not evaluating that SAML, that's a big problem. That's the reason there's a time to live on these, and that's why the de facto standard is like 5 minutes. Okay. We had an implementer wanted to make the time to live a day. And I said, no, we're not doing that. We would all of our systems are configured at what everyone else in the market in the networks is doing, which is 5 minutes. We get a message older than 5 minutes, it goes on the garbage. It goes on the shop floor. It's garbage, gets rejected. And they wanted to do this for 24 hours. And I'm like, we can't do that. I got to reconfigure everything we're doing. It's a giant security exposure risk, and it was a pattern in which they were implementing their message processing. They were building messages, putting them in a queue, and then sending them out of the queue, and it could be as long as a day. So they were pre-signing messages, stacking them up in a queue, and just letting the queue drain over time. And I was like, that's the whole point of this, is for that to not occur, right? Like, it's just
Yeah. So, when you got a DIY, again, it comes back to this use case, and do we have the skill set to do it? And many times you do, and that's great. But again, the whole point of what we're talking about here is to bubble up to the surface those gotchas. And when you start to get out of your realm, when what are the signals that you've outgrown your DIY? Ron, you had a perfect segue into this this last segment that we have here as we try to stay on time. And we started making a list of, what are those indicators that you should look out for? And the first one that we put on the list is how much time is spent. Ron, you were just saying that an integration engineer has a specific skill set, and it's a great skill set. Not everybody has it, and it is unique to this area. Whether you're dealing with X12, whether you're dealing with the IHE, whether you're dealing with FHIR, those are great skill sets to have. But those don't qualify you as a network engineer as well. And they don't qualify you as a server. So when you start out and you're building these things and you're going, well, I already got a secure connection and it's internal, and our internal network guys are handling that. Now when you're starting to do Dixie cup and string and you got to talk with somebody else, you're talking two massive skill sets there that are different than what would ordinarily be the internal. So as you are starting to go, oh, well, I've already done these integrations myself internally, or whatever the case happens to be, and they start to get more, how much time, have to ask yourself, how much time are my people spending on the integration versus IT sec type of stuff? And do you know the answer to those questions? Do you have the ability to measure those? Because if you're not measuring those and understanding the skill sets, how long it is taking people to do those kind of things, well, there's an indicator that if you can't measure it, you're not going to know when you've exceeded your internal capability, and you should start looking at somebody outside to do it. It's just a basic thing. The channel development and connectivity. I wish Derek was still on here, because he does know how to do both. You know how to do both, Ron, but your skill sets are vastly different one to the other.
When I first started fleshing out Gemini, Derek was a member of my team. Most of us old school computer nerds had to do hardware and stuff ourselves. It wasn't a vertical. There wasn't a guy. There wasn't a DevSecOps guy. You were the DevSecOps guy. You were the one putting hard drives in and mounting stuff in racks, and then you would go write the code. It was just the way it was. And so Derek came from this integration background, and I had, like Jim said, I had some skills over here in the hardware world and the networking world, but they were 15, 20 years old, Well, we got to the point where it was growing, and Derek wanted some new opportunities. And I said, okay, come on, grab him by the back of the head. Here's how you make a VM, and here's how you do this, and here's how you do that. What he's done in 6 years, I got to have hour-long conversations with him just to catch up. Like, what'd you do? What is that thing you're doing this week? Show me that, right? The ability at scale, you've got to have those folks that are dedicated to paying attention to products, services, trends, technologies that I can't keep up with as the integration business guy, right? He can, and he's taken that in aces and spades in the right direction, which allows me to focus on product feature and function, and help support pre-sales engineering support, and talking to clients. What are your issues? What are your pain points? If I still had my foot on that side of the fence, we wouldn't be even close to where we are.
Yep.
So it's perfect example.
It's a great example. So one of the things is, if you're not measuring the amount of time that your people are spending in both of those areas, and have a good feel for it and know their competencies, if you're not measuring those things, you should be. And if you are measuring them and you don't know, let's just put it this way: if you're measuring them, it will be a good indicator of when you start going, should we still be doing and handling all this internally? Because you can do it outsourced. If their multiple people are busy all the time with this, you can probably do it cheaper and more effectively outside. But you have to measure it first in order to do it. The next thing that was on the list was, and Ron, I think you put this on
Yeah.
here. How long holistic reboots of systems, and how long are you measuring between reboots? Is that where you were going?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, the DIY stuff. I mean, I had it, in environments that I was gifted with to fix. But you end up with this pattern where Johnny reboots the server every Friday night because it won't live till Monday, right? If you don't reboot it every Friday night, Monday it's offline. Uh, that's an indicator you've outgrown your DIY. Uh, the other one is the opposite side of that, and
Right.
we had a client that had some issues, or we were trying to help him install one of our products, and they happened to well, uh, we had an integration engine running for 400 days, and we said, what? Well, you know what that means is they haven't patched that system for 400 days. They haven't applied a security patch, an update for 400 days.
Right.
We don't go around here without doing security patching at least monthly, and I think in some instances it's every 2 weeks, depending on announcements and things that are peeling out of the market, right?
Yeah, and of course I can, hear Derek, eyes rolling just even thinking about that. But even if, if you've done things internally, okay, you can get away from that a little bit more. You could at least justify a little bit because it's running for a long time and it's not exposed to the outside. Well, and the security will say that's still a really dumb idea. But if we're talking about Dixie cup and string and you're attaching to the other side and you have that characteristic, or you don't know that you don't, you have a problem. It's as simple as that, because that stuff needs to be done. Another along the security route, and we've got 5 minutes left and we will end on time, so we're going to go relatively quickly here, is the management of certificates and connections to overall. What I wrote down here was, if you can't overtly say, or the number of certificates that you're dealing with, or your team, if your team is stressed about, managing the number of certificates, or you don't know that they're not stressed about it, you may have a problem there as well. That is an area you got to remember. Some people will put certificates in there and not care about them, and they're over there. That makes it work. It's out of sight. It's out of mind. No, those are your security passwords. You have to manage those. And like we've said in other cases, you don't put those kind of things where that can be exposed in Mirth Connect channels or any other way that is there. You've got to be able to segregate those things out and limit the access to them. And that means you have to manage those very carefully as well. It's a security issue. And if you've got just a handful of them, okay. If you don't know exactly how many you've got, you probably have a problem. There any other thoughts on that, Ron?
The expiring certificate
Oh
death
yeah,
knell is a huge one. Most
right.
folks don't even know they've expired. They don't monitor effectively enough to know that it's expired, and you could end up with an integration that's offline for weeks, months with an expired certificate. So
Oh, it happens, and nobody's looking at it. They're just thinking that there's no data that's coming in on it. They must not be sending me anything.
yeah.
Really, seriously,
So
and
external certificate stores and managers that can help you report on that stuff is it again scaling. Are you going to go to that extent, or do you need an external solution that has it already built in? Right. That's when are you past the line?
absolutely, absolutely. Another one is knowing what connections you've got. Are all of them requiring 99.9% uptime? Are some of them? Are only a few of them? Do you know which ones are? A connection is not a connection is not a connection. They all have those characteristics. Some of your use cases are very specific and they need to be managed and up. Others are much more tolerant with potential downtime. They're doing batches and those kind of things. But do you know what that is for each connection, and do you know how to keep it up? It's just such a vital thing overall to be able to know that and be ahead when it is down, or if it goes down. How critical is it? Are you getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to fix that one, or are you going to go in at 8 o'clock and start paying attention to it? It makes a huge difference there, and you do have to have the way of being able to determine that going into making that connection. Don't find that out after the fact, after it's up and going. You mentioned it a moment ago, monitoring, so critical. We've talked about it in other sessions. It is a big thing to know what's going on with your connections, and they just don't tell you on their own.
No, and there's probably 8-10 items that monitoring helps keep on your radar that most folks overlook.
Yeah. Now we are out of time. There are a couple of other things that I had on there: RTO, RPO, the maintenance of logs. Logs are not just oh, well, they're over there and let them grow. We've talked about that in other sessions there. Management of those logs, again, how big are they going to grow? Depends on the type of connection you got. And it does make a difference there, and determining the real cost. All of these factors that we've talked about in 3 sessions now are all things that you should be able to estimate what the real cost of that is. And very, very few people do that overall. They just look at it and go, oh, well, Joey will do that, or he does this other thing, and Bill will Bill will help me with that as well. No one understand what your real costs are for those things. Lastly, as we are right at the top of the hour, it's migration. Okay, so you've built this, and now you do have some of the problems that we've talked about here, and migration. I'll sum it up only this way to stay on time. It sounds like it's an awful thing. We can't migrate, so we're just going to continue to put straws on the pile. There are lots of ways to minimize that impact overall. I'm going to save that we'll fit that in another one going forward, because there are a number of topics that we really need to cover for that, but we won't take time and hold you over on that. Well, as a matter of fact, we're a minute over here right now. So we will say this has been a great 3-part series to this one. We will, saw a number of people in the chat do this. If you want that, again, put it in the chat. Those of you who already have, great. We'll make sure that we put this summary together and get it out to you. We're grateful for your attendance and your interest in what we're doing here, and hope that it's been beneficial for you. We'll look forward to seeing you in the next Interop workshop. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Thank you. Have a good one. Nice to meet everybody.